Zara Kethvani stood in the cold metal chamber of the galactic court, her crystal blue skin almost glowing under the harsh lights. She was only 19 years old, barely an adult by her people's standards. Yet here she was facing the most serious crime in the galaxy. The charge sheet floating in front of her made her stomach turn. They said she destroyed 3 peaceful ships and caused the ending of 847 lives. The courtroom was massive, bigger than anything Zara had ever seen back home on her crystal moon. 7 different alien species sat as judges, each one looking at her with suspicious eyes. She could feel their doubt and fear radiating toward her like cold waves. To them, she wasn't just a young girl far from home. She was something dangerous and unknown. Magistrate Vextar, the prosecutor, was a tall gray being with 4 arms and eyes that never blinked. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Citizens of the galaxy," he began, "we are here today because this Etherian deliberately destroyed our chances for peace. She snuck into the most important treaty signing in 100 years and sent secret military codes to enemy rebels." Zara wanted to scream that she was innocent, but her translator collar felt tight around her neck. Every word she spoke would be changed into 7 different languages, and she knew something would get lost in translation. Her people, the Etherians, were known for their ability to walk through walls and solid objects. This gift, which should have been beautiful, now made everyone think she was the perfect spy. The prosecutor activated a large screen that showed security footage from the treaty ceremony. There, clear as day, was someone who looked exactly like Zara near the communication equipment. The timestamp showed it was during the exact moment when the deadly codes were sent out. The footage was so clear that even Zara began to doubt herself for a moment. Had she somehow been in 2 places at once? "The evidence speaks for itself," Vextar continued, pointing one of his 4 arms at the screen. "Only an Etherian could have passed through the security barriers without triggering alarms. Only someone with her exact biological signature could have accessed that restricted area. And only someone with deep knowledge of both military systems could have sent those codes with such precision." Zara's court-appointed defender was a tired-looking Centaurian named Glix, who barely looked up from his datapad. He had been assigned to her case just 3 days ago and had spent maybe 20 minutes talking to her. During their brief conversations, it was clear he didn't understand her culture or even believe in her innocence. To him, she was just another case file to process as quickly as possible. The worst part wasn't even the evidence against her. It was the way everyone looked at her. The Etherians had always been mysterious to other species. They lived on floating crystal moons, could phase through solid matter, and had customs that seemed strange to outsiders. Many galaxy citizens thought they were too different, too alien, too dangerous to trust. When the court took a break, Zara sat alone in her holding cell, staring at her hands. Back home, her ability to phase through walls was seen as a blessing from the ancient crystal spirits. Her grandmother had taught her to use this gift to help others, to reach people trapped in collapsed buildings or to retrieve lost items from impossible places. Never in her worst nightmares had she imagined this same ability would make her the perfect suspect for such a terrible crime. The evidence seemed impossible to fight. The biosignature scanners were the most advanced technology in the galaxy. They could identify any living being down to their cellular level. If the scanners said she was there, then according to galactic law, she was there. No court had ever questioned the accuracy of these devices. As the trial continued, Zara learned more about what had happened that terrible day. The peace treaty was supposed to end a war that had raged for 50 years between the Zephyrian Empire and the Andorian Coalition. Millions of beings had already lost their lives in this conflict. The treaty signing was being held on a neutral space station, with representatives from dozens of worlds watching history being made. Then, just as the documents were being signed, someone accessed the military communication system and sent classified Andorian battle plans directly to Zephyrian rebel forces. Within hours, 3 Andorian diplomatic ships were ambushed and destroyed. All hope for peace died with those ships, and the war continued with even more violence than before. The galaxy needed someone to blame, and Zara was the perfect target. She was young, foreign, and had abilities that most people feared. Her public defender had already suggested she plead guilty in exchange for life imprisonment instead of execution. He said it was her best option, that fighting the charges would only make things worse, but Zara knew she was innocent. On the day of the treaty signing, she had been in the station's meditation gardens, practicing the crystal focusing techniques her grandmother had taught her. She had been homesick and trying to connect with the spiritual energy of her people. She had witnesses who saw her there, but they were all other Etherians who had come for the peace ceremony, and their testimony was being dismissed as biased. The hardest part was the loneliness. She was hundreds of light years from home, surrounded by species who didn't understand her language, her customs, or her heart. Every night in her cell, she would phase her hand through the metal wall just to remember what freedom felt like. But even this small comfort was being used against her as evidence of how easily she could escape from any normal prison. As the days passed, Zara began to lose hope. The evidence was too strong, the prejudice too deep, and her defender too uninterested. She started to believe that maybe she would spend the rest of her life in a galactic prison, forever known as the girl who destroyed the galaxy's best chance for peace. The trial was becoming less about finding the truth and more about satisfying the public's need for justice, even if that justice was wrong. The courtroom filled with reporters from across the galaxy, all eager to cover the story of the mysterious alien girl who could walk through walls and destroy peace treaties. They wrote articles about her dangerous abilities and questioned whether Etherians should be allowed to travel freely among other species. Some planets were already talking about banning her people entirely. Zara closed her eyes and tried to remember the crystal gardens of her home, where the air sparkled with ancient magic and her grandmother's voice still echoed in the wind. She wondered if she would ever see those beautiful places again, or if her story would end in this cold, metal courtroom, surrounded by beings who saw her as nothing more than a monster wearing a young girl's face. The news about Zara's trial traveled across the galaxy like wildfire, reaching every corner of civilized space. On Earth, a small blue planet that had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, people watched the broadcasts with growing concern. Humans were still considered newcomers by most alien species, but they had something that made them different from everyone else in the galaxy. They believed that everyone deserved a fair trial, no matter how bad things looked. David Chen sat in his small office in New Geneva, watching the trial coverage on his holographic display. He was a defense attorney who had spent 20 years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Before becoming a lawyer, he had served in Earth's military, where he learned that the truth was often buried under layers of assumption and fear. Now, as he watched this young alien girl sitting alone in that massive courtroom, he felt the same fire in his chest that had driven him to become a lawyer in the first place. The more David watched, the angrier he became. Not angry at Zara, but angry at the system that was clearly failing her. Her defender barely spoke during the proceedings, never challenged the evidence, and seemed more interested in getting the trial over with than actually defending his client. It reminded David of the worst cases he had seen back on Earth, where poor defendants were given lawyers who didn't care enough to fight. David had studied galactic law for years, fascinated by how different species approached justice. Most alien civilizations relied heavily on technology and probability calculations to determine guilt. If the computers said someone was guilty, then they were guilty. The idea of innocent until proven guilty was almost uniquely human, and many species thought it was inefficient and emotional. But David knew that emotions weren't always a weakness. Sometimes they were exactly what was needed to see past the cold facts and find the real truth. He had won cases that seemed impossible by simply caring more than anyone else in the courtroom. by asking questions that others were too logical or too tired to ask. 3 days after first seeing Zara's trial, David made a decision that would change both their lives. He filed an emergency petition with the Galactic Court to represent Zara as her new defense attorney. It was a long shot. Humans had never represented aliens in major galactic crimes before, and many species still saw Earth's legal system as primitive and emotion-based. The petition caused a stir throughout the galaxy. Legal experts debated whether a human could even understand the complex laws that governed interspecies crimes. Some argued that David was just looking for fame, trying to make a name for himself by taking on a high-profile case. Others worried that human involvement would make the trial even more chaotic and unpredictable. But David didn't care about the criticism. He had read every piece of evidence released to the public, and something didn't feel right. The case seemed too perfect, too neat, like someone had carefully arranged all the pieces to point directly at Zara. In his experience, real crimes were messy and complicated, not surgical and precise like this one appeared to be. The flight to the Galactic Court Station took 3 weeks, giving David time to study everything he could about Etherian culture and biology. He learned that Zara's people were deeply spiritual, connected to the crystal formations of their home moons through meditation and ancient rituals. They valued harmony above all else and had never been involved in galactic conflicts before. The idea of one of them deliberately starting a war seemed completely against their nature. More importantly, David discovered something that apparently no one else had bothered to research. While Etherians could phase through solid matter, they couldn't do it while maintaining perfect molecular stability. This meant that operating complex electronic equipment while phased was nearly impossible. It was like trying to type on a keyboard while your fingers were made of fog. Technically possible, but extremely difficult and likely to leave traces of molecular disturbance. When David finally arrived at the court station, he was amazed by its size and complexity. The station was home to over 1 million beings from hundreds of different worlds, all working together to maintain galactic law and order. He felt very small and very human, walking through corridors filled with creatures he had only seen in textbooks. His first meeting with Zara took place in a sterile conference room deep within the station's legal complex. When she walked in, escorted by 2 security guards, David was struck by how young she looked. Her crystal blue skin seemed to glow softly in the artificial light, and her large eyes held a mixture of fear and stubborn hope. "You're human," she said, her voice soft and musical even through the translation device around her neck. "Yes, I am," David replied. "My name is David Chen, and I'm here to be your new lawyer if you'll have me." Zara sat down across from him, studying his face carefully. "Why would a human want to help me? Your people barely know mine exist." David leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Because I believe you're innocent, and I believe everyone deserves someone who will fight for the truth no matter where they come from or what they look like." For the first time in weeks, Zara felt a spark of real hope. This human didn't look at her with fear or suspicion. He looked at her like she was a person, not a monster. "But the evidence against me is so strong. Even I sometimes wonder if I really did it and just don't remember." "That's exactly what whoever really did this wants you to think," David said. "But I've spent my whole career learning that evidence can lie, computers can be fooled, and the truth is often hidden in places no one thinks to look." Over the next several hours, David asked Zara questions that no one had bothered to ask before. He wanted to know about her family, her home, her dreams, and her fears. He asked about Etherian customs and abilities, not as potential criminal tools, but as parts of her identity and culture. For the first time since her arrest, someone was treating her like a real person instead of just a suspect. As their conversation continued, David began to see the outline of a defense strategy that no one had considered. The previous lawyer had simply accepted that the evidence was accurate and unquestionable. But David's human perspective, trained to doubt and question everything, saw dozens of possibilities that others had missed. "I need you to tell me everything about that day," David said. "Every detail, no matter how small. Where you went, who you saw, what you ate for breakfast, everything. Sometimes the smallest details can crack the biggest cases wide open." Zara began to tell her story again, but this time someone was really listening. Someone was taking notes, asking follow-up questions, and treating every word as important. As she spoke, she began to remember things she had forgotten. Small details that might not mean anything to her, but could be crucial to David's investigation. When their meeting ended, David made Zara a promise that would drive everything that followed. "I don't know how long this will take or how hard it will be, but I promise you this. I will not stop looking for the truth until I find it. You are not alone anymore." As David walked back to his temporary quarters on the station, his mind was already racing with possibilities. He had work to do, evidence to examine, and witnesses to interview. Somewhere in the massive complexity of this case was the real truth, and he was going to find it, even if it meant challenging everything the galaxy thought it knew about justice. David Chen had been working on Zara's case for 2 weeks, and his small station quarters looked like a detective's nightmare. Papers covered every surface, holographic displays showed evidence from dozens of angles, and empty coffee cups created a small mountain on his desk. While most galactic lawyers relied on advanced computer analysis to build their cases, David preferred the old human way of doing things, getting his hands dirty and following every lead personally. His first breakthrough came when he decided to visit the actual crime scene. The communication array where the military codes had been transmitted was located in the restricted section of the station, 3 levels below the main treaty hall. Most beings would have simply looked at the digital recreation of the scene, but David wanted to see it with his own eyes. The security chief, a gruff Corellian named Thex, reluctantly agreed to give David a tour. "I don't understand why you humans always want to see everything in person," Thex grumbled as they walked through the metallic corridors. "Our scanners captured every molecule of evidence. What could your primitive eyes possibly see that our technology missed?" David smiled at the comment. He had heard similar things from dozens of alien officials over the past 2 weeks. Sometimes the most important evidence isn't what you can measure with machines. Sometimes it's what doesn't make sense when you see it all together. When they reached the communication array, David immediately noticed something that bothered him. The area was incredibly cramped, filled with complex machinery and barely enough room for one person to work comfortably. According to the prosecution's case, Zara had phased through the outer wall, operated the communication equipment with perfect precision, and then phased back out, all while maintaining solid form to use the machinery. "How long did the transmission take?" David asked, examining the tight space between the equipment panels. 17 minutes and 43 seconds, Thex replied, reading from his datapad. "Long enough to access the files, decode them, and send them to multiple rebel locations across 3 star systems." David squeezed between 2 large computer units, trying to imagine someone doing complex technical work in such a confined space. And Zara supposedly did all of this while keeping her molecular structure stable enough to operate touch-sensitive controls? "That's what the evidence shows," Thex said, though his voice carried a hint of uncertainty for the first time. David's human instincts told him something was wrong. He had studied Etherian biology extensively over the past weeks, working with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist from Earth who specialized in alien physiology. Elena had explained that while Etherians could phase through matter, maintaining molecular stability for extended periods was extremely difficult and exhausting. Doing complex technical work while phased would be like performing brain surgery while running a marathon. After leaving the communication array, David began interviewing witnesses that the previous defense lawyer had never bothered to speak with. Most aliens found this approach strange and inefficient. But David knew that people often notice things they didn't realize were important until someone asked the right questions. His most interesting conversation was with Pip, a young maintenance worker from the Rigelian species who had been cleaning the lower levels during the time of the crime. Pip was nervous and kept looking around as if worried someone might overhear them talking. "I saw something that night," Pip whispered, his 6 eyes darting back and forth. "But when I told the investigators, they said it wasn't important because their scanners didn't pick it up." David leaned forward, his experience telling him this could be crucial. "What did you see, Pip?" There was someone else in the restricted area that night. Not an Etherian, someone wearing a biosignature scrambler. Those devices are illegal, but they make it impossible for scanners to identify who's wearing them. David's heart began to race. Biosignature scramblers were black market technology, expensive and dangerous. They could theoretically allow someone to fake another person's biological signature while hiding their own identity. "Can you describe this person?" Tall, moved like they knew the station well. But here's the weird part. They went into the communication array about an hour before. The Etherian girl was supposed to be there, and they didn't come out until after the transmission was complete. This was the first real evidence David had found that someone else might have been involved. But when he tried to access the maintenance logs and security footage from that time period, he discovered that several files had been corrupted or mysteriously deleted. It was too convenient to be an accident. David's investigation led him deeper into the station's underground levels, where he discovered a thriving black market for illegal technology. In the shadowy cantinas and hidden shops, he learned about people who could forge biosignatures, hack security systems, and make evidence disappear for the right price. One name kept coming up in his conversations: Crix Valdone, a smuggler who specialized in identity theft technology. According to several sources, Crix had recently come into a lot of money and had been bragging about pulling off the perfect crime. David knew he needed to find this person before they disappeared completely. It took 3 days of searching, but David finally tracked Crix to a gambling den in the station's lowest level. What he found there made his blood run cold. Crix Valdone was dead, apparently having taken his own life, but David's military training told him that something was very wrong with the scene. The room looked too clean, too organized for someone who had just ended their own life. More importantly, David noticed small burn marks on Crix's neck that looked suspiciously like wounds from a Zephyrian neural disruptor, a weapon that could stop someone's heart while leaving almost no trace. David immediately contacted station security, but when they arrived, they seemed more interested in closing the case quickly than investigating thoroughly. "Looks like suicide to me," the lead investigator said with a shrug. "These smuggler types can't handle the pressure when their crimes catch up with them." But David wasn't satisfied. He had spent enough time in military investigations to recognize a cover-up when he saw one. Someone with access to advanced weapons and the ability to manipulate evidence had eliminated the one person who could prove Zara's innocence. As David dug deeper into Crix's background, he discovered connections that made his investigation even more dangerous. The smuggler had been working with high-level officials from multiple species, providing them with black market technology for years. His client list included diplomats, military officers, and even judges from various galactic courts. The more David learned, the more he realized that Zara's case was just the tip of a massive conspiracy. Someone with significant power and resources had orchestrated the entire situation, using her as the perfect scapegoat to cover their tracks. But who had the ability to manipulate evidence on such a scale, and what was their real motive? David's. Human persistence was starting to pay off, but it was also making him enemies. He began noticing strange looks from station personnel, and his communications with Earth were mysteriously delayed or interrupted. Someone was definitely watching him, and they weren't happy about his investigation. One night, as David worked late in his quarters, he received an anonymous message that chilled him to the bone. "Stop digging, human. or you'll end up like your friend Crix." The message came with a photo of David entering the gambling den where Crix had been found, proving that someone had been following his every move. David stared at the message for a long time, thinking about Zara sitting alone in her cell, trusting him to find the truth. He thought about his promise to never stop looking for answers, no matter how dangerous it became. Then he deleted the threatening message and went back to work. He was getting close to something big, and whoever was behind this conspiracy was getting desperate. That meant he was on the right track, even if it meant putting his own life at risk. The truth was out there, hidden in the corruption and lies of galactic politics, and David was determined to find it before it was too late. For Zara, David spent 3 sleepless nights going through shipping records, communication logs, and financial transactions that most lawyers would never think to examine. His human approach of following paper trails and connecting dots was finally about to pay off in ways he never expected. What he discovered would shake the foundation of galactic politics and prove that sometimes the biggest criminals hide in the most respected positions. The breakthrough came when David noticed something strange in the casualty reports from the treaty attack. Ambassador Thylas Krendow, one of the most senior Andorian diplomats, was listed among those who died when the 3 ships were destroyed. But when David cross-referenced the biosignature logs from various space stations, he found something impossible. Krendow's signature had been detected on 3 different worlds after his supposed death. At first, David thought it might be a computer error. Death records were usually very accurate in galactic databases, but his human instinct for spotting lies told him to dig deeper. He spent 2 full days tracking every appearance of Krendow's biosignature, creating a timeline that told an incredible story. According to official records, Ambassador Krendow had died heroically trying to maintain peace between the warring factions. Memorial services had been held across the galaxy, praising his dedication to diplomatic solutions. But David's investigation showed that someone with Krendow's exact biological signature had been buying illegal weapons, meeting with known war, profiteers, and transferring massive amounts of money to secret accounts on neutral worlds. The more David learned about Krendow, the more the pieces fell into place. The ambassador had been working both sides of the war for years, selling military secrets to the highest bidders while publicly calling for peace. The treaty signing wasn't just a chance for peace. It was a threat to Krendow's profitable business of keeping the war going. David realized that Krendow had used stolen Etherian biosignature technology to frame Zara while faking his own death in the attack. It was the perfect crime. He could disappear from his old life while ensuring the war continued, and an innocent alien girl would take the blame for everything. But David still needed proof that would hold up in galactic court. Andorian diplomatic immunity laws were some of the strongest in the galaxy. You couldn't just accuse a high-ranking ambassador without overwhelming evidence, especially one who was supposedly dead and being honored as a martyr. David's investigation took a dangerous turn when he decided to track down Krendow's secret financial accounts. Working with Dr. Elena Vasquez back on Earth, who had been analyzing the biological evidence, David discovered that the biosignature scrambler technology used in the crime could only have come from one source: a secret Andorian military research facility. This meant that Krendow hadn't just faked his death randomly. He had been planning this for months, maybe years, setting up Zara as the perfect scapegoat while building his new identity as a dead hero. The attack on the treaty ceremony wasn't just about continuing the war. It was about allowing one of the galaxy's most respected diplomats to disappear completely while someone else paid for his crimes. When David tried to present his findings to the court, he ran into the biggest obstacle of his career. Magistrate Vextar, the prosecutor, argued that human investigation methods were too primitive and emotional to be trusted in such an important case. Several judges agreed, saying that David's evidence was based on speculation rather than the solid technological proof they were used to. "Your Honor," David said, standing before the 7-judge panel, I understand that my methods seem strange to you, but sometimes the truth can't be found by computers and scanners alone. Sometimes you need to follow the story that the evidence tells, even when that story is uncomfortable. Judge Keltar, a wise Vulcarian who had been presiding over galactic courts for over a century, leaned forward with interest. Explain to us, human lawyer, why we should trust your primitive methods over our advanced technology. David took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine Zara's fate. Because technology can be fooled, but patterns of behavior cannot. Ambassador Krendow spent years building a reputation as a peace-loving diplomat while secretly profiting from war. When the treaty threatened his income, he used his access to military technology to frame an innocent girl and fake his own death. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Accusing a respected ambassador of such crimes was almost unthinkable, especially one who had supposedly died as a hero. But David wasn't finished. I have financial records showing massive transfers from Krendow's secret accounts to known weapons dealers. I have biosignature evidence placing him on 3 different worlds after his supposed death. And I have testimony from witnesses who saw him using illegal identity-scrambling technology. Magistrate Vexatar stood up angrily. These accusations are outrageous. Ambassador Krendow was a hero who died serving the cause of peace. This human is clearly desperate to save his client and will say anything to create doubt. But Judge Keltar was studying David's evidence carefully. These financial records, she said slowly, where did you obtain them? From the same black market sources that provided the biosignature technology used to frame my client, David replied. The underground network that Krendow thought he could use and then eliminate to cover his tracks. David explained how Crix Valdone, the forger who had been found dead, had been working with Krendow for months to create the perfect frame-up. The plan was to use Etherian biosignature technology to make it look like Zara had committed the crime, then eliminate all evidence of the conspiracy by making Crix disappear. But Krendow made one mistake, David continued. He trusted technology more than human nature. He thought that if he could fool the scanners and computers, no one would ever question the official story. He didn't count on someone actually talking to witnesses, following paper trails, and asking the questions that machines never think to ask. The judges began to look uncertain. The evidence David had presented was unlike anything they had seen in a galactic court before. It wasn't based on scanner readings or computer analysis, but on the kind of detective work that most species had abandoned centuries ago. Judge Corex, a Centaurian known for his logical approach, spoke up. Even if we accept your theory, how do you propose to prove that Ambassador Krendow is still alive? Death records are among our most secure databases. David smiled, knowing he had been saving his best evidence for last. Because I found him. The courtroom fell completely silent. David activated a holographic display showing surveillance footage from a gambling establishment on the outer rim of the galaxy. There, clear as day, was Ambassador Thylus Krendow, supposedly dead for 3 months, conducting business with known criminals and war profiteers. This footage was taken last week, David said. Ambassador Krendow has been living under a false identity, continuing to profit from the war he helped perpetuate while an innocent girl sits in prison for his crimes. The implications hit the courtroom like a shockwave. If David was right, it meant that one of the galaxy's most respected diplomats was not only a criminal, but had orchestrated one of the most devastating frame-ups in galactic history. It also meant that the entire case against Zara was built on lies and manipulation. Magistrate. Vextar was visibly shaken. This is impossible. Our death verification systems are foolproof. Not foolproof enough to stop someone with access to the highest levels of Andorian military technology, David replied. Someone who had been planning this deception for years and had the resources to make it perfect. Judge Keltar called for a recess, and David could see the wheels turning in the minds of all 7 judges. His human approach to investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of galactic government. Now the question was whether the court would have the courage to face the truth, even when that truth was more shocking than anyone had imagined. The final day of Zara's trial arrived with tension so thick you could almost touch it. News of David's shocking accusations had spread across the galaxy overnight, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, diplomats, and citizens from dozens of worlds. Everyone wanted to see whether a human lawyer's unusual methods could really overturn one of the most secure cases in galactic legal history. Zara sat at the defendant's table, her crystal blue skin glowing softly with nervous energy. For the first time in months, she dared to hope that she might actually go home. David had shown her the evidence he had collected, and even she was amazed at how deep the conspiracy went. But she also knew that proving Krendau was alive was only half the battle. They still had to convince 7 very different alien judges to accept human legal methods over their traditional technological approach. David had spent the entire night preparing his final presentation. He knew this was more than just about saving Zara. It was about proving that human values of justice and thorough investigation had a place in galactic civilization. If he failed today, it might be decades before humans were taken seriously. In galactic courts again. Judge Keltar called the court to order, and the massive chamber fell silent. "Counselor Chen," she said, "you have made extraordinary claims about Ambassador Krendau. Today you must prove them beyond any reasonable doubt, or your client will face the full penalty of galactic law." David stood up, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. "Your Honors, 3 months ago, the galaxy lost faith in peace when those diplomatic ships were destroyed. Today, I ask you to restore that faith by ensuring that the real criminal faces justice, not an innocent girl who was chosen as a scapegoat because of her species' unique abilities." He began by methodically presenting his evidence, using human storytelling techniques to weave together financial records, biosignature data, and witness testimony into a compelling narrative. Unlike the cold technological presentations the court was used to, David's approach made the evidence feel personal and real. Ambassador Krendau spent years building 2 identities, David explained, showing holographic displays of the secret financial accounts. To the public, he was a peace-loving diplomat working to end the war. But in private, he was selling military secrets to both sides, making enormous profits from the continued conflict. The judges listened intently as David traced the money trail that connected Krendau to weapons dealers, information brokers, and even rebel groups on both sides of the war. It was a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of galactic society. When the peace treaty threatened to end his profitable business, David continued, Krendau decided to eliminate the threat while creating the perfect cover for his disappearance. He used stolen Etherian biosignature technology to frame Zara, then faked his own death in the attack he had orchestrated. Magistrate Vexitar, who had been growing more uncomfortable throughout David's presentation, finally stood up. "Your Honors, this is all speculation and conspiracy theories. Where is your proof that Ambassador Krendau orchestrated this elaborate scheme?" David smiled, knowing this was the moment he had been waiting for. "I'm glad you asked, Magistrate, because I have a witness who can testify to everything I've just described." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs as David activated a secure communication link. On the holographic display appeared the face of Crix Valdone, the biosignature forger who was supposed to be dead. "Crix," David said, addressing the hologram, "please tell the court how you're able to testify today when you were reported dead 3 weeks ago." Crix's nervous voice filled the courtroom. "Ambassador Krendau tried to have me eliminated because I knew too much about his plan. But the human lawyer found me before the assassins could finish the job and helped me fake my own death to stay safe." David had spent the past week tracking down Crix, who had been hiding on a remote mining station after barely escaping Krendau's attempt to silence him permanently. With David's help, Crix had been moved to a secure Earth facility where he could testify safely. "Tell the court about your business relationship with Ambassador Krendow," David instructed. Crix's testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Krendow had approached him months earlier with a plan to frame an Etherian for sabotaging the peace treaty. Krendow had provided Etherian biosignature samples and advanced scrambling technology, paying Crix enormous sums to create the perfect fake evidence. "The ambassador told me it had to be an Etherian because their phasing abilities would make them seem like the perfect spy," Crix explained. "He chose the girl because she was young, alone, and had no powerful friends to protect her." But David wasn't finished. His final piece of evidence was the most dramatic of all. "Your Honors, I call Ambassador Thylas Krendow to testify." The courtroom fell dead silent. How could David call a dead man to testify? But then the security doors opened, and two galactic marshals escorted a tall Andorian into the courtroom. It was indeed Krendow, very much alive and looking furious at being captured. David had worked with galactic security to set up an elaborate trap, using Crix's testimony to locate Krendow's hideout on the Outer Rim. The dead ambassador had been arrested just hours before the trial's final session. "Ambassador Krendow," David said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "would you please explain to the court how you managed to testify today despite being officially dead for 3 months?" Krendow refused to speak, but his presence was all the evidence the court needed. Here was living proof that David's investigation had uncovered the truth that advanced galactic technology had missed. Judge Keltar leaned forward, her ancient eyes studying Krendow carefully. "Ambassador, these are serious accusations. Do you wish to respond to the charges against you?" Krendow finally spoke, his voice filled with arrogance and contempt. "You fools don't understand anything. The war was profitable for everyone involved. Peace would have ruined countless businesses and left millions unemployed. I was serving the greater economic good." His admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Here was a respected diplomat openly admitting to sabotaging peace efforts for personal profit, confirming everything David had discovered through his investigation. The 7 judges deliberated for less than an hour before returning. With their verdict, Judge Keltar stood to address the packed courtroom. "This court has witnessed something unprecedented today," she began. "A human lawyer has used methods we considered primitive to uncover a conspiracy that our most advanced technology failed to detect. Counselor Chen has shown us that sometimes the oldest approaches to justice, careful investigation, attention to detail, and refusing to accept easy answers, are still the most effective." She turned to look at Zara, who was trembling with anticipation. "Zara Kethavani, this court finds you completely innocent of all charges. You are free to return to your homeworld with the full apologies of the galactic justice system." The courtroom erupted in cheers as Zara collapsed into tears of relief. David put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, feeling the weight of months of pressure finally lifting from both of them. But Judge Keltar wasn't finished. "Furthermore, this court hereby establishes the Chen Doctrine, a new standard of evidence that requires thorough investigation and proof beyond reasonable doubt, incorporating the best of both human intuition and galactic technology. As for Ambassador Krendow, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for war crimes, conspiracy, and the murder of innocent beings. His elaborate scheme had not only failed, but had led to reforms that would make galactic justice more fair and thorough." Zara returned to her Crystal Moon homeworld as a hero, representing the triumph of truth over prejudice. David became the first human granted permanent status in galactic courts, opening the door for Earth's legal principles to influence justice across the stars. Months later, as David sat in his new office on the galactic court station, he received a message from Zara. She had become an advocate for legal reform in her own system, working to ensure that no other innocent person would face what she had endured. The message ended with words that perfectly captured what their case had achieved. Thank you for showing the galaxy that justice isn't about having the best technology. It's about having people who care enough to fight for the truth, no matter how hard it might be to find." David smiled as he read those words, knowing that sometimes the most important victories aren't won in courtrooms, but in the hearts and minds of people who decide to never give up on doing what's right.